Welcome everyone. Welcome in Let's Talk AI for this new episode. I'm super happy to be here. I'm with Cristina Martinez Pinto. Cristina, ¿cómo estás? Or how are
Muy
you?
bien, estoy muy bien. Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation. I'm really excited to be here with you and with your audience.
Thank you. Just for anyone that might not know you in the audience, I always like to ask my guests to define themselves. So, could you define yourself in a few sentences, in a few words?
Of course, I think that's an existential question. I think I have many identities. I consider myself a generalist, an internationalist, a tech policy entrepreneur, a mom, a daughter, a wife, a sister, a friend. I think I'm someone that's very professionally driven.
Hmm. And if you would define yourself more in a professional way, how would you explain what you're trying to achieve? I always like to understand. I would really like to go back into your background and what you've done so far and how you grew and how you managed to capture all this experience. But to the people listening, what are you trying to achieve today?
Of course. So one of these many identities that I mentioned is being a technology policy entrepreneur. I have a background in international relations and public policy, and I've been working. And well, coming from the social sciences work, I've been contributing to the field of technology policy and technology governance, and specifically working in developing research policy recommendations around the uh, around how to leverage specific kind of technologies like artificial intelligence for
Mm,
social impact. So I am also the
mm,
founder and CEO of the PIT Policy Lab. PIT stands for Public Interest Technology, which is a movement that places technology as a
hmm.
tool for the social good. So actually, it becomes the like technology is a means for a public interest purpose, and
Yes.
what's at the center of the work that we do is actually the communities, the people that we design for either interventions, programs, recommendations, depending on the scope of the project that we work on. And I think it's
Okay.
important to say that we focus in the Latin American region as a consultancy startup that provides these services.
Okay.
I think this is a very interesting and nascent field, but it didn't come
Okay.
out of nowhere. It's building on decades of other movements that and ecosystems and communities that have formed around open data, around open government, around GovTech. I think there are many different concepts that have their own community of practices, but that in the end have a confluence. And I think public
Hmm.
interest technology is an umbrella that bring this kind of communities together. Also,
Hmm.
I think I identify myself as a civic technology, someone that had previous experience in the public sector. That's
Hmm.
why I got in love with the policy world. Someone that's also very curious and that enjoys science fiction. That's why I found like a perfect intersection in between thinking on
Hmm.
possible futures, specifically desirable futures, because of course we can have utopias and dystopias.
Yes. Hmm.
So using science fiction as an inspiration, but then also narrowing down to the present, and to
Yes.
understanding how technologies are impacting our society and transforming our relations towards one another. And
Wow.
well,
That's
it's very complex, but it's fascinating because it's also very relevant and in some cases novel, at least in the approaches that
okay.
we take to do some of the research that we do. And yeah, I'm
Hmm.
happy to discuss more about this with you.
Awesome. Well, now for the people who didn't know you, now they have quite a great picture of what you want to achieve and who you are. Um, that's awesome. Well, I have a lot of questions because I was not familiar at the beginning, to be honest, with technology policy, entrepreneurship, or public interest technology. So I, I looked a bit about the subject, and I would like to define a few things with you before understanding maybe better when you talk about novel approach or research that you might do, like maybe dive a bit deeper into how does it looks, like for example a pattern. I have many questions regarding that,
Oh, yeah,
but the
I
first
have
one
one.
is can you define public interest technology and the components it represents?
Yes, I I want to. What I want to put on the table is that as a movement, the public interest technology ecosystem of practitioners haven't come yet to an agreement of a single definition. However, I do
Okay.
think it's a very interesting book, sorry, that's called Power to the Public. That has a focus on the United States experience because I think it's in the United States where this practice is growing exponentially, mostly in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
So, although it's centered mostly on the US experience, and we know that when talking about technology policy and governance, context matters. So, the US context might not be applicable to the rest of the world, is not necessarily applicable, but there are lessons learned and frameworks that are useful to think how can we get what we might think works in our context and then change
Mm.
it and then propose something new. uh, One specific definition that they use in that book, it's like a 3D model because you have a combination of use of data for data analysis, for decision making. You
Mm-hmm.
have you put it together with design frameworks and tools. You know, you have human centered design. There's also a proposal that was developed by a couple of researchers at the Peck Center for Social Impact and Innovation on a user-centered policy cycle map. And I think that's an amazing tool that we've been using, and it's been really helpful to help us frame the life cycle of our projects with the user, with the person in mind at the center, and using design tools. And then you also have
Mm-hmm.
the delivery component. So how you bring what happens after you have the design component, the data,
Yes.
you deliver for the public that you're for the public interest, but specific for specific publics that you're designing for. So I
Mm-hmm.
think I like this 3D model. It's sometimes hard to to translate it into Spanish or other languages because it doesn't necessarily holds. But I think the idea
Okay.
does, and the idea is to again to use data, empiric evidence to for decision making, to put people at the center, and to co-create with the people. Is not only I as a researcher I am gonna provide solutions that I think work for them, but it's actually listening to them to understand what the problem is in the first place and whether or not
Mm.
any type of technology can be part of the solution. Because again, it's not about, I think what happens a lot is that we have like that we already, and I remember having these discussions while working as a public servant, and then in my other roles at the digital development global practice at the World Bank or at CMIND's AI for Social Good Lab. And and I think something that always comes across is that we want to explore the specific uses of a specific technology within different contexts.
Mm-hmm.
But then again,
Mm-hmm.
it's like I already have the use case, and I want this use case to be developed in a specific context that I think might be fit. And it's all the way around because it's not about the technology and the use case we want to develop. It's actually about solving problems with the public interest in mind. So if there's a specific problem, and if we can ask the people that are being impacted by it what's happening, then we can
Mm-hmm.
have a better
Mm-hmm.
understanding whether a specific set of solutions can include or not technology. And I think
Mm.
that is hard to to recognize because sometimes or we could tend to think that the technology component is the most is the important part of the project or an
Yeah.
initiative, but it's actually not. It's actually working with the people that takes time, changing,
Okay.
having like thoughtful conversations, uh, and taking the time to actually make sure that we are identifying potential risks, that we're putting in place strategies to mitigate those risks, and that we then also have like a strategy or a mechanisms that we can go back and forth to iterate whatever that we're proposing to make sure that that it's taking into account the potential impact that is having
Yes.
within the people that we work with.
Okay. Okay, and I wanted to ask you about. You said different things. I wanted to come back. You talked about principles. So I would like also to talk about principles. I would like to talk about AI governance.
Mm-hmm.
But first, to come back to the entrepreneurship perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So you define yourself at the beginning as a technology policy entrepreneur,
Uh-huh.
as this between many other things, of course. But so regarding the business side, for example, there is what kind of client comes to you, and how with technology policy or public interest technology, like how do you approach problems with those clients? Who are those clients to ending up having a public interest technology?
Okay.
How does the process work? It's maybe a very entry level question, but
No,
uh,
actually, I think it's an excellent question because um, it defines policy entrepreneurship in two different terms. Because I think the first one has to do with with the concept of being a policy entrepreneur, and that is more. It's an existing concept, like an academic concept that
mm,
when I learned, I found it fascinating, and it's also it stemmed from my community of practice in the U.S. You see that I'm influenced by the UX experience because I've been close, like professionally and during my
yes.
educational training to U.S.
Mm,
institutions, which I think it's fascinating to contrast to the European Union experience, to the Western, to the rest of the world experience. I think that the U.S. provides interesting examples, but it's not necessarily the context that makes sense for many Latin American countries or others. So
yeah.
anyway, so policy entrepreneurs refers to people that are policymakers, but that are also on the lookout for opportunities to enable change within
Mm,
their scope of work. So I really like that
yes.
because I'd never defined myself before as that. I was just a policymaker, of course, but I think it's this part of being curious and looking for more and looking for opportunity and looking to make things happen. So that's a huge component of policy entrepreneurship. How within the set of resources that you have, the skill sets you have, how do you make things happen? And then on the second layer of the policy entrepreneur, as the
Yeah.
founder of the P Policy Lab, I think when defining what was like our target group of clients, initially you would think public interest, of course, governments, local, national governments. But I don't know if you've experienced this, but you might know it or be related to it. It's very hard. Like budget, public budgets are scarce.
Mm,
uh, Public the timelines to work with the public sector are also a challenge because you always in some kind and another have a change of administration, a change of a political appointee, and you
yeah.
might already have had like a specific project in mind that in the end you had like this person that was leading a department or ministry or institution that's changed, and then your project comes to a halt. So
Mm,
what we actually do, and it's part of our approach, is that we work with different sectors where the governments at the national level, at the local levels, are very important, but so is the rest of the actors that come to play into our initiatives. For instance, we have
Mm-hmm.
startups, we can have the social sector, NGOs, we
Yes.
can have academia, we can have the private sector, big tech companies, and we can have international organizations. And at least we've been operating for 2 years, and what we've been doing, of course, we're trying to diversify, like
Mm.
how do our clients look like. But to be honest, it's a lot of looking for open calls and submitting proposals to specific projects that are mostly financed by international organizations. Can be
Mm.
banks like the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, CAF. It can be foreign governments like the United Kingdom, like France, like the
Mm-hmm.
European Union, like
Mm.
like Germany, their cooperation agencies. So it's always a matter of being on the lookout for opportunities,
Mm.
and also to work with other organizations in understanding what are our strengths, how we can complement each other. In I think there's a trend of, instead of competing against each other, creating these consortia where we come as a stronger building block
Yeah.
to apply to this kind of multi-year initiatives. I think what's
Hmm.
important. I think what's also important to mention. The Pay Policy Lab is the first spin out of C Minds. C Minds is an amazing. It's a woman-led organization. It's where I led for a couple of years the Artificial Intelligence for Good Lab, and we're their first spin out. And together with C Minds, with other organizations like Centro y para el Futuro, México Digital, Latam Digital, and so many other social tech, so many other organizations that are working on the tech field from different angles. Well, I think
Mm-hmm.
we are acknowledging each other's roles. We're recommending each other depending on the type of projects that we're doing, depending on the
Mm.
expertise that's needed. And I think that's also a very interesting like value added that we put on the table with our PIT consultants network, because what we did there was identify Latin American experts on very specific topics like data intelligence, like technology policy, like gender and technology, like digital activism and human rights, like uh, e-health, e-government, govtech, and so on, like
Mm-hmm.
so many different angles. So if we have a specific project that requires the expertise of anyone in the consultant network, we know who to go to. And
Hmm.
if it's something that's outside of the scope of, we have 25 experts on a variety of topics, but still, if it comes like we were working last year on a project on smart tourism, and we were on the
Mm-hmm.
lookout for an expert on smart tourism, and we found him, and now he's
Yeah.
part of the network. So it's always a process where we're looking for talent, where we're looking to not only for talent to incorporate, but also to make their trajectories and their knowledge more visible to the rest of the region and to the world, to say
Hmm.
there's talent in our region, and sometimes
Hmm.
what's lacking is opportunity. And I think
Yes.
that's also something that's very important to the public interest technology field, because as I said, it's a field that's growing mostly in the United States, and
Mm-hmm.
it's supposed to be very like inclusive and diverse and equitable, but then it's
Hmm.
completely close to the United States experience. So I think
Yes.
when we as the P Policy Lab emerged, what we were thinking is how can we open the tools, the frameworks, the knowledge that's being developed by the community of practice to Latin America, and how can we not only open
Yes.
and import the knowledge, but how can we contextualize it, contribute it, and strengthen it as an international debate. So I think
Hmm.
that's something on the timeline. Definitely, it's not something that we believe will happen overnight, but we've already been
Yes.
working for 2 years, and it's just a matter of time when there's more international collaboration towards the public interest technology field.
Hmm. Okay. That's I'm super happy to learn all those concepts because those are not necessarily the part of AI and technology I'm the most familiar with
Mhm.
personally. Um, and you mentioned so many things. You mentioned uh, the inclusive parts, like making that everyone, like making something fair. And I feel like this relates a lot to how you define yourself at the beginning, like technology policy entrepreneur. Regarding what you said and what you just explained regarding this sector, I have one question about AI governance,
Mhm.
technology and AI governance. You mentioned that you are leading AI. I'm sorry, I didn't get correctly the name. Um,
I was
the A.
leading. It was called. It is called. It's still a leading organization in the field. AI for
Uh-huh.
Social Good Lab from C Minds. They are
Okay.
doing amazing work around AI ethics, AI governance. They are doing a lot of work around future. Like they have an initiative that's called Future of Earth, AI for Climate.
Oh.
I think
Mm,
they're internationally known for that work. It's really
that's
really.
amazing.
You should definitely talk to them.
I will.
And
I will. You
uh
might, if you're listening right now, you might see episodes with a lot of people from there
yes.
because this is really what's about. Let's Talk AI. It's we want to put light on what's going on in the world. A lot of the time when we speak to a very public, very large audience, AI is like something that can be either very bad or very good, but in the end,
Mhm.
it's just a tool and being able to share with people like you who have this expertise. And I will come to my question about AI governance.
Uh-huh. Sure.
But this is what we want to understand because, for example, I am a bit more technical, but I've shared with people that are more into the business part, and I feel like this concept glue everything's up, and it is essential to what is the value we will put into the world. I still need to get more comfortable regarding some concepts, but my next question is about AI governance.
Sure.
And
Mhm.
so you explained us a little bit all the definitions, how you are leading AI at this specific at this specific. I'm sorry, I can't with the name. What was the name again? Sorry.
At Siemens AI for Good Lab?
Yeah,
Yeah,
this
at a
name.
lab. Yeah, yeah, at a lab. You can say.
Adela. Sorry. So, my question would be, where do the regulations begins and how could we make, because you mentioned the problem of the United States just before, how
Mhm.
can we make those regulations globally? How can we apply those regulations globally?
I think this is also an excellent question, and I'm gonna take a little bit, just a couple of step backs before getting to
Yes.
regulation, because you were mentioning,
Okay.
because you
Yes.
mentioned before the principles, data, the AI governance, and I think it's important
Yes.
to just be like aligned on these concepts.
Okay.
So um, when we are discussing AI governance, we are talking
Mm-hmm.
about overarching frameworks to manage the use of AI, and in some instances, specifically, like a practice or suggested practice, sorry, for the
Mm-hmm.
specific deployment and development of responsible AI. There are
Mm.
different initiatives in the world. There are many papers that are working around the documentation analysis of what do AI principles mean. There was an explosion during the past years around the like a proliferation on the adoption of AI principles by companies, by countries, by regions. and by multilateral organizations like international organizations like the OECD.
Mm.
And for example, you have the OECD principles that were adopted by member countries and signed by other adherent countries other countries that
Mm-hmm.
adhere specifically to these principles. So I think the conversation around AI principle is quite clear, but there's not a lot yet of agreement on how to move forward, how to go from the principles to the practice.
Yes.
So what we did at the People Policy Lab is, with this question in mind, what we analyzed an initiative that the World Economic Forum has that's called Responsible Use of Technology. That's actually really interesting because it puts the focus on the private sector and not on the public sector. And we thought
Mm.
this is interesting because usually you say governance and you think immediately of regulation, a
Mm.
regulation from a public entity, and that's
Yeah.
not necessarily the case. It's desirable, of course, because it's a set of rules that allows certain types of of, of how to say comportamiento, uh, just
Yeah, like
just on
habits or
habit,
actions.
or specific actions on what you do within some limits. If there are no limits, well, there are no like there you can do anything, and bad things can happen when those limits are not established. But
Uh-huh.
the reason why we focus this specific paper on the private sector was
Mm-hmm.
because we wanted to see what were some of the big tech companies doing around this specific question of bringing principles into practice. And this
Mm.
initiative from the World Economic Forum is very practical. It's focused on developing use cases from companies like Microsoft, like Salesforce, like IBM,
Mm.
on exactly what does it mean for them to have a specific set of principles and then put them into practice
Mm-hmm.
as part of their operations.
Okay.
And what's really interesting, and I mean, I would definitely invite you to read our paper to get more detail on the specific
I will.
examples that we provide there
I will put
of
it in the description.
like good practices. But what was also something that we wanted to to make more visible is that all of these use cases have been developed in the global north countries, even though these big technology companies have operation in global south countries, so and
Mm-hmm.
an impact in global south countries.
Yeah.
So with that
Mm.
in mind, what we also do is we analyzed the what was happening regionally, and there are a lot of interesting initiatives focused specifically on the private sector, on frameworks for the private sector
Mm-hmm.
to help them navigate the development and the deployment of AI at nascent stages. So it's been fascinating because with the support, for example, the Inter American Development Bank has been leading this with the FAIRLAC initiative, an initiative that's also being like co-partner with C-Minds. Um,
Yes.
uh, Meta and C-Minds develop a booklet with specific guidelines for startups, like how, again, principles to an ethical guide to put principles into practice for startups. And it provides very practical, not only tools like self-assessment tools, but also ideas of what to do depending on the stage of the entrepreneurial life that you are at as a company. So I think it's an interesting
Mm-hmm.
combination because on one hand you have these big tech companies that are doing interesting practical things that can be replicated if you find like a potentiality or a similarity or usefulness that you could apply within your own businesses or within your own teams. And then the self-assessment tools and frameworks that are being created regionally with a focus on small and medium enterprises. But again, this is what I think. This talks more about self-regulation and anticipation to what might be coming legally uh, in specific countries, regions, or in the
Mm.
world. I
Okay.
To be honest, I don't think that we should be aiming for a global regulation, like a global regulatory approach, because again,
Okay.
there cannot be a one size fits all approach. Although there can be common principles, not principles, but again, there are already a lot of principles, but common standards on tools and frameworks that are being adopted by specific countries that could
Yeah.
be applicable globally. For example, the European Union has an interesting like approach, risk-based
Mm-hmm.
approach
Mm-hmm.
that's based more on the levels of risk that the use of artificial intelligence could have, depending on its application, right? And of course, if it's like
Mm.
a high risk, it's like a no-brainer. It's banned, or it's not encouraged. And if it's like a low risk, it can be explored, and it's within like a playroom, like a safe space for experimentation. So I
Mm.
think when talking or when discussing about the future of regulation, there are two tensions that occur that have to do with the velocity at which regulation can happen, and then again to the velocity of the technology evolution, right? We might be
Mm.
discussing something for 3 years, and then by the moment that we got into an agreement, that technology is already obsolete. So at least I think what's happening and what the best practices are sharing or are putting in the table is the possibility
Mm.
of being very flexible, and on putting more more emphasis on tools that can be iterated, that can be constantly updated, and that can be monitored and improved.
Mm.
So it's not a static
Mm.
work. It doesn't become something that was it wasn't like an exercise that involved a million people and then you have the results and that's it. But it's more of a process that can be continued, that can be improved, that can be updated, and
Mm.
that then allows you for regulatory flexibility within certain limits, taking into account,
Mm.
if you want to, or if you're creative or have other ideas, but taking into account, for instance, a risk-based approach to artificial intelligence. And
Mm.
and as I said, well, I've been influenced on my professional career by the U.S. experience. However, I think there are a lot of good practices emerging from the rest of the world, and there are
Mm-hmm.
countries that are at different levels of conversation on the need to regulate artificial intelligence or other technologies, and some others that are still at a different level of discussion. However, I do think what's necessary is to first, well, again, understand that context matters, but then also be inclusive and bring different voices, representative of regions to the table. Because otherwise,
Mm.
if we always feel we are behind because we're still facing connectivity issues and we're facing um, the the challenges around the development of digital skills and digital citizenships and other kind on data governance, these concepts that precede the use of artificial intelligence, then
Mm-hmm.
then we're never gonna get there. It has to happen in parallel. It's
Yeah.
not like one thing and then the
Yeah.
other. It has these policies, actions, collaborations have to occur at the same time at different levels within
Mm.
different actors.
Mm. So that is super interesting. And if I understood correctly, this point, and I will re-listen to this episode to make sure I get back on some parts. I will do the reading you recommended me, and I will of course ask more about this. But it is it is complicated to build the governance and policies for the world, but it is important to give visibilities and to share with the world what is going on specific places, and having a very inclusive approach, working with people abroad to have a more common knowledge and work from that towards projects that can be built through time and not just applying governance to specific tools in time.
No, yes, and recognizing that the Western experience is not representative of the world experience. I last
Yes.
year I joined the Feminist AI network, which I think it's a
Mm-hmm.
fantastic network. It has been an amazing space for discussion, for collaboration, and also to think and challenge power imbalances. And I think that's like at the core of it, how we stop defining our own experiences as representative of the rest of the world and are actually uh, developing new initiatives, projects, technologies, and not only not developing for but with the communities and with an idea with
Mm.
an ideal objective, which is that those communities would be developing those technologies for themselves, which is like the last
Mm.
aim that should be happening. And
Okay.
it's really it's fascinating to see how many discussions, how many projects,
Yeah.
how many angles you can
Mm-hmm.
take from something that in the beginning might be perceived as simple as creating a code of ethics or as
Mm-hmm.
analyzing a specific the specific impact of a specific technology in a community. When you start
Mm.
using other tools and when you see these projects through different lens, for example, through a gender lens, then you realize it's much more complex and you need a different set of frameworks to actually respond the research questions you might have when you're doing research. But then if it's not
Yes.
only the production of knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
how which is what we do, okay, we produce knowledge, but also how do we make this knowledge actionable? So again, how do we connect with other areas so that our recommendations can become policies, can become follow-up projects, have different audiences, you have decision makers, the
Mm-hmm.
people, the companies, the governments, depending on who's involved. And 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 it's just and I think it's just fascinating to see also how in recent years the role of of social scientists has also been recognized as critical in the development and deployment of technology projects, whether it be
Mm-hmm.
artificial intelligence or others. So
Mm.
I think this will be an interesting year. We're gonna
Mm-hmm.
continue seeing very like mind blowing applications of AI and other technologies. But again, uh, it, that should not or that should be an invitation for us to continue making the hard questions and identifying how, okay, so wow, we're seeing this amazing potential application. Who could it affect, or who is it not including or not representing? And
Mm.
then by asking these kind of questions, we can start by realizing we have a research project or a specific project, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe no, it's just
Mm-hmm.
a conversation that will lead to something else. So
Wow. No, that's super interesting and that's fascinating. Well, we will definitely on the podcast learn more about this. We might talk again in the future to learn more of all these subjects. I know you're running late and you're running on a tight deadline, so I will do just two really quick questions. The first one is how can people reach out to you, learn more about you, what you do? How can they look your job and
of course, I like using. I think LinkedIn is a great tool for connecting with people professionally. So I'm in
mm-hmm,
LinkedIn as Cristina Martinez Pinto, and I will also, of course, invite you to follow the P Policy Lab social media, which is at P Policy. Visit our website policylab.tech. My email is Cristina at policylab.tech. And we have, like, in our website we have publications, we have videos, resources that you can download. And I think would like to also invite the audience to think themselves as public interest technologists, because I think it's important, whether we are like technicals, whether we come from a social science background, to think how our work, if related to technology, how it impacts the world.
Mm.
um, and I think a first great step is recognizing us ourselves as a community of practice, to connect with each
Mm-hmm.
other, to discuss in spaces like this, in important
Mm-hmm.
spaces like this that you're providing, for people to learn more about new concepts, and
Mm-hmm.
to also define a sense of belonging and identity to a group of people that might feel that, oh, okay, so this is what I was looking for, because it's what happened to me. So yes, I'll be looking forward to connect with more people.
Awesome. And this was my like question. It was, do you have a message? But I feel like you kind of gave a message already. Maybe you want to add a last quote, but
No, I'm open to continue this discussion. I think this is, as we tend to say, the tip of the iceberg. I'll be looking forward to go in more depth on potential on next
mm-hmm.
episodes, or with people from your audience that might be interested in
Mm-hmm.
learning more about the type of projects that we do. I think we didn't really get the chance to talk about our different set of projects that are actually, I think, are a good representation and example of the different services that we provide. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
happy to discuss that in another episode.
That sounds great. Thanks a lot, Christina, for coming on the podcast. Let us know if you have any questions, if we should deep dive into some specific subjects of, let us know your interests. And I'll see you on the next episode. Bye.
Bye bye.